afternoon, nerds. It is January 1st, 2024. That is crazy to me, but it is happening. As promised in my channel plans video, I'm gonna spend this week, like through Sunday, posting videos about my best of the year, which is this one, the worst of the year / most disappointing, which would be in a couple of days, maybe Friday. And then Sunday, I will post my superlatives. And then sometime in there, maybe it'll be on Sunday also, I'll have a double post, maybe I won't, I don't know. I'm going to be posting a short little video detailing my book buying ban for 2024. And this is, honestly, it's mostly just for me because I want to be held accountable for my actions in 2024. And if I post it to the internet, then I'm more likely to not buy books in the way that I'm wanting to not buy books throughout the rest of the year. If you saw my video that I posted yesterday where I detailed all the books I bought last year and did not read, so it was a great way to spend my money. You'll see why I need the book buying again. Anyway, all that to say, this is my top 23 favorite books that I read in 2023. Eventually we're going to get to a point where I'm like, nah, we're just going to do a top 10 or a top 20. But for now, I can do like through 25 maybe. The top 10 are in order. They are ranked, and I'll do those and I'll talk about them more than I will the rest of them. And then 11 through 23, I'm just going to talk about those pretty quickly, and they're not ranked. They're in no particular order. This is 23 through 11. I'm not going to number them. First up, this is a book I read pretty early in the year. I didn't pick it. My friend Jessie picked it for a book club, and I was so surprised by how much I enjoyed this. This is honestly one of the best nonfiction books I've ever read, and that is Bitch on the Female of the Species by Lucy Cook. So this is a book about science and sort of like the history of science, but the way it's framed is that patriarchy and sexist views and gender roles in society have literally shaped the way that scientists throughout history have viewed female and male animals. And their perceptions of what a female and male should be literally colored the science and the way that we understood the way that the natural world worked. In the past decade or so, there's been a lot of science overthrowing those patriarchal norms and rethinking things that were once taken as a given. But that's not why this book was my favorite. This book was my favorite because it was absolutely hilarious. So as you can see, I tabbed everything that I thought was funny or funny and interesting. And this is what it ended up looking like. I'm not going to read any quotes because if I did, then, we'd be here all day. If you want to learn and be entertained at the same time and also feel like a sort of righteous rage tempered with good humor, this is the book for you. It was just really good. I had such a good time with it. Okay, I need to stop talking about it now because this is only number 23. Next up is Yumi and the Nightmare Painter by Brandon Sanderson. This is Secret Project number 3. It is his first attempt at a romance, and he succeeded admirably. I gave this 5 stars. Every book in this video is 5 or 4.5 stars that I rounded up to 5, and then has just gotten better in time since then in my mind. This one it's in his Cosmere, but you could read it on its own if you wanted to. There's going to be a lot of stuff that you would miss in terms of like the shared universe of his world, but the main story stands on its own, which is the story of Yumi and Painter, and they live on different worlds, and due to magical circumstances that we learn about in detail throughout the book, they have found themselves mysteriously connected, where one of them wakes up in the other one's body and the other one is like a spiritual presence there with them, and then the next day the other one wakes up in the other one's body in their normal habitat, and it starts all over again, and they have to figure out a way to find out what's going on, to fix it, and along the way they also gain a greater understanding of their place in their own lives and fall in love with each other. And it was just such a good time. He just perfectly executed this. I mean, it's probably with rereads, this would end up being one of my top 5 maybe favorite Brandon Sanderson books, which is saying a lot because I love him and I read everything that he writes. So yeah, Yumi and the Nightmare Painter is in my top 23. This is a book that I was talking about earlier, where I originally rated it 4 stars rounded down because it disturbed me. And that didn't sit well with me at first, so I felt like I couldn't give it 5 stars. But then over time, it just sat in my head and got better. And I'm like, well, this is stupid. I should have rated this book 5 stars. And that is The Southern Book Club's Guide to Slaying Vampires. This is a horror satire that takes place in the 1990s in Charleston, South Carolina. And the impetus behind Grady Hendrix writing this book is that he wanted to pit Dracula against his mom, which he does admirably. Not literally his mom, but the main character's name is Patricia. And then there's a group of women in her book club that also sort of stand in for that 1990s mom thing that he was going for. But my favorite part about this book was the way that the humor and the central conceit of the vampire and how he inveigles himself into their society is a stand-in and a condemnation of the society in which this takes place, and by extension our society, where women could be undervalued, where the vampire takes advantage of patriarchy and racist structures to make himself all-powerful and well-liked, and basically he can do whatever he wants and kill whoever he wants with impunity until the book club gets involved. And I just had so much fun with this. I'm gonna go get my tea. I got my Gideon the Ninth mug. Just final thought, that book is quite disgusting. So if you are going to be like grossed out, if you're easily grossed out by stuff, you might want to read with caution. Okay, next up is TJ Power Has Something to Prove. This is a book that took me totally by surprise by how much I loved it and also how it stuck with me. I randomly just checked out the audio for my library book. The audiobook is great, by the way, if you like audio. This is a book about a girl named TJ who's pretty and popular and has a boyfriend who's on the football team, and she lives in Canada. She is Punjabi. Her parents were immigrants to Canada, and she has a cousin, and that cousin is not pretty, not popular, doesn't care to conform to social norms. She does not remove her body hair. And one day somebody posts a nasty picture meme of the cousin next to TJ, and they say, like, they compare them in a very mean and cruel way. And this sets something going in TJ's brain where she starts to think about the pressure that she's put under to remove all of her body hair at all times, to conform to beauty standards that she never agreed to. And because she has darker, thick hair, it is a lot of effort to remove body hair. So she just decides, what if I didn't? What would happen? My favorite thing about this was the subtlety and the nuance, because she's not entirely clear what her motives are as she starts this endeavor. But as she goes on, she just becomes even more determined to go through with it because of what it's doing to the people around her and what she's discovering about herself and other people. And it was just so well done. Like, the body hair thing was so relatable. The beauty standards thing was so relatable. TJ herself was such a good character. I love her so much. And this had a cute little romance as well. So I cannot recommend this highly enough. Even if you don't normally read YA, please read this. Vera Wong's Unsolicited Advice for Murders is next. This is, I mean, people have been calling it a cozy mystery. I'm not quite sure that it is a cozy mystery. It has a cozy-ish vibe and a found family vibe. So I guess you could say that's cozy, but it's not a cozy mystery. It is cozy and a mystery, but it is not a cozy mystery. Cozy mystery is a different beast entirely. And I feel like people are just throwing that term around willy-nilly. And this, anyway, that's a conversation for another day. But I love this book so much. Vera owns a tea shop, and one day she comes down where she lives alone. She's widowed. Her son doesn't have much contact with her, and she finds a dead body in her shop. And she decides, because the police are incompetent, that she is going to solve this murder. And so she sets about tracking down all the suspects, and her way of finding out who the murderer is to befriend all of the suspects and mother them until she figures it out. And you can see where the conflict in that would be. Like, what do you do when you find out who the murderer is? But it was so delightful. It was funny. Oh my God, it was so funny. And I loved all the characters. I love Vera. I laughed so hard while reading this. Jessie Q Sutanto can write funny stuff. And I just really vibe with the whole thing. And I really recommend this one. Next up is the transgender issue. I'm not going to go into this because it was a really harrowing read, and I could talk about it for like 20 minutes if I wanted to. Instead, I will simply say, if gender and bodily autonomy is important to you and is something that is interesting to you, whether or not you yourself are gender nonconforming or trans, this is an excellent book that recenters the conversation on what trans people and gender nonconforming people actually need, instead of making them the issue and discussing whether or not they should even exist. The premise here is that they exist. Here's what they need in order to be treated like human beings. And it was such a great read. I cannot recommend this one highly enough. Next up is a book I've talked about endlessly on this channel since I made it public in July, and that is The Good House by Tananarive Due. This was just a fantastic horror novel. This is technically a haunted house novel, but it's so much more than that. It follows 3 generations of Black women in this house, the Good House, and a spirit and haunting and entanglement that gets caught up with them. And it also explores issues of Black contemporary American life, the pressures of masculinity and violence. And it was also just creepy as hell. And I really enjoyed the sense of scope that the author plays with. She writes long books, but she does that for a purpose, and they work perfectly, and I loved it so much. This one surprised me, and that's The Magician's Daughter. Just a perfect little book. It follows, oh shoot, what's her name? Biddy. So Biddy's our main character. She's a young girl who washed up on the shores of this magical island when she was a baby and was taken in by a magician and his familiar, who is a rabbit, Hutchincroft, and they raise her. But she can't ever leave the island, and she's getting restless. She wants to know what's out there. She's having like a coming of age moment where she wants to find herself and her place in the world, but something else is going on that makes it so that she can't leave, and that when she does, things start happening. This was just so lovely. The writing was so great. I loved the characters. The magic plot was just perfectly calibrated. It wasn't cozy. There were some real stakes in here, involving like where magic went and where did Biddy come from and what's she going to do with her life. And then there's a rather fraught romantic relationship between the magician and somebody in the wider world. And this was just great. Highly recommend. Next up, another book that I have yabbered about endlessly since finishing it, and that is The Shadow Cabinet by Juno Dawson. This is the second book in the Her Majesty's Royal Coven series. It follows a coven of contemporary witches in England as they deal with this prophecy about the sullied child, and the sullied child who is coming to basically, they are heralding the return of a great demon to the world. And there's a lot of conflict that is reflected here in contemporary society, that is reflected magically. And I think the way that Juno Dawson does that is great. The first book in this series was a little bit wonky in terms of the writing because it was her first adult fantasy novel. I think her first fantasy novel in general, but definitely her first adult fantasy and her first adult novel. So it was a little rickety, but this book, she really comes into her own. I had such a great time with this book. It managed to turn me around on not one, but 2 characters I was previously disliking, and let alone like turn me around, but like their POV became my favorite part of the book. The twists in this series, though, I will warn you, book 1 ends with a terrible cliffhanger, and this ends with a terrible cliffhanger as well. And I just learned that we are not getting book 3 next year. We are getting a prequel, which I'm very excited for the prequel. Like, I'm not usually a huge prequel person, but this prequel is about Anne Boleyn, who is the founder of Her Majesty's Royal Coven. And that is something I'm super interested in. So I'm very excited about that. But we are going to have to wait on the cliffhanger and ending of this one probably until 2025, which is very upsetting. I love the series. If you like witches, if you like feminism, if you like, again, gender nonconforming and queerness in your stories, check this one out. 2 more in this stack. First up, we've got He Who Drowned the World by Shelley Parker Chan. This is the second book in this duology that started with She Who Became the Sun. And honestly, like, I've had such a weird reaction to this book. I've heard so many people say that they loved it, but that it was really hard to read and really harrowing. And I don't know why. I agree with them, and I can see that objectively, but I flew through this book and I found it super easy to read. Even as all of these terrible things were happening, something about this story just energized me. I can't talk too much about the plot of this one, but the first book is about a person named, is it Zhu? Yeah. well, that's not her name as she's born with it, but she's very, very poor. Her family has died of starvation, basically, and she had a brother. And when she and that brother were younger, a fortune teller came to their village and said that her brother would have a great destiny. And when he dies, she literally takes that destiny from him. And she goes off and lives this life where she becomes a monk, and then she becomes involved. And she's very like manipulative and intelligent and driven, and such an interesting character to follow. There's a lot of, this is a reimagining of the story of a real life historical figure in, is it 13th century China or 12th century back then? So you know, if you know that's what happened to that real life character, that you know what happens at the end of this book. But the author, Shelley Parker Chan, has inserted other characters that didn't exist in real life, and they have gender bent this character, Zhu, because in real life he was just a man. But here, it's a person who is unsure in their gender to start with. Let's just say that. So I had such a good time with this. I can't explain why. I don't even fully know why myself, but this is definitely a series that's worth your time. And then last up on the non-top 10, we have Kingdom of Copper by S.A. Chakraborty. Oh my God, you guys, it's already at 20 minutes. Oh, this is so awful. I'm so sorry. This book was just super intense. This is the second book in the City of Brass was the first book. This is the Daevabad trilogy. I put this book off for so long, and I wish I hadn't, because I had to refresh my memory about what happened in book one, because things get elaborate politically here. But if you follow it, it's so intense. This book was so intense. I'm not going to talk about this because it's too complicated. This was a 5-star book. I finished it and I was like, I need a break, man. I need a drink or something. I need something. I'm finishing up this series, I think in March or maybe February. No, it was March. I'm reading the 3rd book. So that's exciting. And then I still have the short story collection that came afterwards. Okay, I'm going to take a break now. Okay, I'm back. I had my break. Gotta drink my tea. Losing my voice, I think. Okay. Well, I don't know how much I can say about all these top 10, but here we go. The thing with me, and I'm sure a lot of you experience this as well, is I have a really hard time a lot of the times articulating why I love a book so much. It's easier. It is so much easier to pinpoint why a book didn't work and why you didn't like it than why you loved it. It just feels too big. But here we go. Okay, so number 10, Blood Over Bright Haven by M.L. Wong. So this is a book that I read over the summer, and it has not left my brain since. A lot of people have been saying this is a little too heavy-handed for them, and I kind of understand that, but at the same time, it's pretty clear that the issues that are in this book, which the way that M.L. Wong plays with the characters, those issues are so impactful. Like, they hurt you. This book hurts you. It will hurt you. Just FYI. This is a dark academia book. The main character's name is Siona. She's bound and determined to be the first woman into this magical academy that I always forget the name of. I need to reread this book. And it's all men. She's the first woman ever, and she makes it in. And obviously, as you could imagine, the men are not happy that she's there. But this isn't a story about a woman fighting against the patriarchy and winning. This is not that kind of story, okay? This is a story about how the systems in place destroy people, and how in order to destroy those systems, you also have to destroy a lot of other stuff as well. I compared it to Babel when I was reading it, but the themes are very similar. So if you read Babel, it's very similar to that. But I actually thought this was more hard-hitting than Babel was. I was like so shocked by portions of this. So basically, she gets given an assistant whose name is Tamil, and he is a member of a minority race, very minority, in their city. And basically, they're looked down upon. They're seen as unhuman. They're seen as savages, all that stuff that privileged people say about the other so that they can keep their power and not feel bad about it. And these are issues that are directly dealt with in this book, because the relationship that Siona and Tamil build with each other is it was the thorniest, most complicated, yet hopeful, yet disappointing, yet shocking thing I've ever read. That was the real meat of this book. And then to top it all off, there is a plot about the discovering what actually makes this city run, a corrupt underbelly. And I don't want to spoil it, but this book was so great. Everyone should read it. I'm so excited to read Sword of Kaigen this year, and I hope I love it just as much as I love this one. Okay, next up, this was my only romance that I 5-starred this year. I had a shitty romance reading year. It was just so good, and I need everyone to read it. And that's Role Playing by Kathy Yardley. I need to thank my friend Rochelle / Emelita for this one. I never would have picked this up otherwise. This is a book about two middle-aged people finding each other in the middle of their lives. They're lonely. They're sort of searching for ways to make their lives better and less lonely. What are their names? Shoot. So this is Maggie, and this is Aiden. And they're in their 40s and 50s. I think, are they both in their 50s? I can't remember. I think he might be in his late 40s and she's in her 50s. And she is newly an empty nester. Her son has moved away to college, and that has left her even more of an empty nest than usual because she's divorced. And she was sort of in an emotionally abusive relationship with her son's father. At the very least, he didn't love her and he did not respect her or treat her well. And she has lots of social anxiety, and she's also neurodivergent. And then Aiden is, unbeknownst to him, he's demisexual, so he falls in love and into attraction with people very, very rarely. He's only had 2 previous relationships, and one of them was with his brother's wife, current wife. She left him, and she has made his life a living hell with his family ever since. He has a terrible mother whose idea of love is completely conditional. And all of this is the situation that they find themselves in when they meet online in a gaming guild that was facilitated by some people in their community. So everyone in the guild lives in their town. She goes by Bogwitch, which is hilarious. And he thinks that she's this old woman when they meet online. So he like befriends her all the while thinking that she's an old woman. So the scene when they finally meet is absolute, and she thinks that he's a college kid because he's taking classes at a local community college, and that's how he meets the other members of the guild. So I don't know, and it goes from there. And this is one of the most mature, lovely, heartwarming, still sexy romances that I've ever read. There's also, he is bisexual in addition to being demisexual, and that's a thing. So this is queer as well. And I just enjoyed it so much, and I need everyone to read it. This one I have not talked about yet at all on my channel, and I didn't review it on Goodreads because it's the end of the year and I never want to do anything at the end of the year. And this was a 5-star read for me, and I loved it so much. It bumped off another meta mystery book that I was going to put on here in its place, which was Murder Your Employer, which is a great book, by the way. Did not make my top 23, but it was great. This book was better, and that is Everyone in My Family Has Killed Someone by Benjamin Stevenson. This is like my perfect mystery. It was cheeky, it was fourth wall breaking. The whole book is centered around the fact that it's a murder mystery from the start. He writes about murder mysteries, he writes about genre. So he's always pointing out when things are happening in the story according to the genre and how things are being, surprising you anyway. He literally tells you on page 14 what pages people die on. So I literally went in and I tabbed every scene where somebody dies. And actually that really enhanced my reading experience because a lot of the times somebody will die in the timeline of the book, but not on page, if you know what I mean. Like the words do not say, and so died. Like 3 pages later, they'll find the body and you realize, oh, they died on that page while this person was talking to this person. And I could see the tabs coming, so I don't know, it was just great. So this is a book about a man, his family, everyone in his family has killed someone. They are down on their luck. They don't like the cops. His brother's in jail for murder. You find out pretty early on why. And he's sort of estranged from the rest of his family because he was involved and he testified against his brother in the trial. Book is structured so that the main mystery, which involves them being stranded at a ski resort during a family reunion because his brother's getting out of prison, parallels with him telling us about every single member of his family and who they killed. It was so great. I'm so excited for the second book. It's coming out in like 3 weeks, and I will be rereading this one for ages. Okay, next up, this one I never ever would have guessed in a million years that I would have this book, let alone given this 5 stars and loved it, but have it as one of my top 10 books of the year. This is number 7, and that is Nestlings by Nat Cassidy. I got an arc of this book, so I just was tickled by the summary of this book, which ends with the phrase, but he can't explain the needle-like bite marks on the baby. And that just like tickled me for some reason, the bite marks on the baby. I don't know why, but I needed to read this book and find out what's up with that. Like everyone's been saying, this book is sort of a cross between Salem's Lot and Rosemary's Baby. And I actually stopped halfway through. Oh shit, I forgot 2 books in my honorable mentions. I'll get to that in a sec. This is a chaotic video. I actually stopped reading this halfway through, read Rosemary's Baby, and then got back to this. And I can recommend that, by the way, because after I read Rosemary's Baby, the echoes of this, the way it was paying homage to that story and yet doing its completely own thing at the same time was great. I loved it. So this is a book about Anna and Reed. They are a youngish couple in New York City, and they win a housing lottery for affordable housing in New York. And they get to live in this big fancy building called the Deptford for very low rent. Like it's not free, but it's like at an affordable rate as opposed to the normal rate, which I assume would be outrageous. And things start being weird as soon as they come in the door. On top of which, Anna is paralyzed from the waist down. She's in a wheelchair because she took damage to her spinal cord during the birth of their baby Charlie, who is now a year old. So she not only has trauma from that, an extremely traumatic birth, which that's a huge part of this, and she also has postpartum depression. So she's been dealing with a lot. So all of that on top of them moving into this apartment, which isn't accessible. But these people like welcome them in and they're like, oh, we'll make it accessible. We'll put ramps in. We'll make sure the elevator is serviced, like all this other stuff. So they're like, fine, we're going to do it. And they move in. And then things get really weird. What I loved about this book is it's almost literary horror. It's not quite, because he's too genre. He's too genre for that. And there's so many throwaway moments of goofiness. I don't want to spoil it, but if you're interested in the moment that made me cackle out loud, put it in the comments, or I don't know, find me on Goodreads or something. It's in my links to Goodreads is in my bio. But it had too many of those moments. But like the way that he talks about belonging and identity and motherhood, and it was like, this is a dude writing from the perspective. If you've read Rosemary's Baby, there's a similar but not quite the same dynamic between the 2 married couples. Reed isn't my favorite, but I loved Anna. And the ending to this book is one of the best horror endings I've ever read. So, and then he does an afterword also that really just puts everything into perspective, and it was so great. The other thing is that Anna and Reed are Jewish, and so is Nat Cassidy, and Jewish folklore plays a big role in the story of what's going on here. If you're not liking monsters and that kind of stuff, and the creeping dread and paranoia of being manipulated, don't read this. But otherwise, I would say, even if you're skeptical, pick this up. It was so great. I mean, just on the basis of this alone, I feel like Nat Cassidy is going to be one of my favorite authors going forward. Can't wait to read Mary. God. This is so much. Okay, let's pause real quick. Pause. So I forgot to mention earlier, there were 2 books that I don't have physical copies of that are in my 11 to 23. And one of those is Rosemary's Baby, which is why I finally remembered. And I don't have a physical copy of that yet because they are actually printing a new hardcover edition in a couple of weeks that I pre-ordered in October when I found it. Just luckily, I didn't even know was happening. But I don't like any of the other covers of this book. And then I went and I found this and I was like, oh my God, it's beautiful. So I've got that coming, but I don't have it yet. This book was just it's a classic for a reason. It has aged so well. I'm going to be reading more from Ira Levin because the way that he portrays the paranoia and the body horror of this woman who's just wanting to live her life and be a mother and have a family and have a respectful, honest relationship with her husband. And meanwhile, everyone around her is just manipulating the shit out of her and lying to her and co-opting her bodily autonomy for their own purposes. It's just horrifying, but so good. And I did the audiobook, and actually, what's her name? Mia Farrow narrates the version that I listened to, and she plays Rosemary in the 60s version of the movie. So yeah, I had a great time with Rosemary's Baby. And then the other book that I don't have a physical copy of, I did have one, but it was so damaged, and I just put it in a little free library, and I want a non-damaged copy. And that's The Devotion of Suspect X. As mentioned previously on this channel and in this video, I love a mystery that plays with format. And this is not a whodunit, it is a whydunit. You know from the first chapter whodunit because you watch them do it. So it's more like a cat and mouse, or is there two cats and a mouse? I can't remember. There's three main players in this book and their motivations as the investigation for this murder goes on. It was just brain candy. I loved it so much. I can't tell you very much about it because I don't want to spoil anything for you. You should go in completely knowing nothing. But if you like mysteries, especially really clever ones that are masters of suspense, please read this book, The Devotion of Suspect X. In fact, any Keigo Higashino book, I've loved all of the ones that I've read. This is probably my second favorite from him. I also loved Malice, but Newcomer was great as well. Now back to my top 10. We've done 4. So next up is number 6, and that is The Adventures of Amina Al-Sarafi. So this is one of 2 of my top 10 that I had time to reread because they were on audio. And the other books I did originally on audio, some of them, and I want to reread physically so I can annotate and, if I want to, and tab my favorite parts and take my time with them. So I do want to reread a lot of these this year coming up. But I did get to reread this one, and good news, it holds up so well. Also, the audiobook version is so fun. The way they produce it, like this is told in a frame narrative from Amina's perspective as she and this person called Jamal is transcribing her story for her at the beginning. So you know she makes it, but it's fine because it's so fun. But the way they do the audio is like, it's like she covers the mic in her asides to Jamal and they mutter at each other, and it's so funny. Anyway, this is a story about a middle-aged pirate captain who has been retired for 10 years. She's a mother now, and she gets pulled in for one last job and has to go back and find her crew wherever they've dispersed throughout the Mediterranean and the sea. Well, and here it's called the Arabian Sea. They go all over the Middle East and even to Africa. It's an adventure. Like, look at this cover. This is what you're going to get. And I loved all the characters. It's gloriously queer. It was so fun to read from the perspective of a Middle Eastern character in the Middle Ages instead of some old crusty white person in a castle. It was so refreshing. I love the mythology. I love the overarching story and the promise of the next 2 books in this trilogy, because Amina has 5 tasks she needs to accomplish, and she accomplishes 1 at the end of this one, so there's 4 more to go. And I just loved everything about it. I loved it so much. If you haven't jumped on this bandwagon yet, you should do that immediately. Number 5, also a book that really took me by surprise. I've read all of this author's work except for 1 novel and a short story collection, and I liked all of them, but this book was on another level, and that is Black Sheep by Rachel Harrison. I was just utterly delighted by this book. I guess there's some people who want to be scared by their horror. I don't want to be scared by my horror. I want to have my brain tingled with darkness, and I want to have like black humor, and I want like gross stuff to be right side by side with like funny and sweet stuff. And like this does that, all of that in spades. So this is about a woman. I'm not going to tell you further in, like, just, you kind of got to trust me on premise here, because spoiling what this book is about would be a crime to you. At the very beginning, the setup here is that the main character, whose name is Vesper Wright, she has been estranged from her family for 6 years. She ran away when she was 17, and she basically was raised in a cult. Very strong religious fundamentalist vibe. Very like brainwashy kind of situation. So she runs away because she never fit in, because she's a black sheep. But she is drawn back into the orbit of her family by a wedding invitation that shows up on her door. She doesn't know who sent it. Her family doesn't know who sent it. And it's a wedding invitation to her former best friend's wedding, and her former boyfriend is marrying her former best friend. And this just does something to her brain, and she just, before she knows it, she's on a train and she is going to that wedding and getting back into the family. And while she's there, some stuff is discovered. Mostly what I liked about this book was how funny it was. Like, very black humor. I loved Vesper. Reading from her point of view, she's such a judgmental asshole, but like in a great way. Like, I would want to be friends with her. When you find out what's going on here, it was like I had to stop reading and just laugh, like cackle and kick my feet in glee, because I was so delighted with what was going on. I don't know how to explain it other than to say that. I just really love this, and I want to reread it really soon. Top 4. Number 4, this is the second book that I had time to reread on audio. Also, the audiobook is great, and that is Emily Wilde's Encyclopedia of Fairies by Heather Fawcett. I read this book in March and did not look back afterwards. It was so good. Emily is one of my favorite characters. I love her and Wendell together, her colleague. She thinks of him as a rival, and he thinks of her as his best friend. But she's neurodivergent also, so she has trouble socially, and she's going to this island, this is an alternate Earth, and it's basically Iceland, but she's writing an encyclopedia of fairies. She's a hardcore academic, so there's lots of academic talk in here, which really appealed to me. I love fake academia. In fact, I created an entire Goodreads shelf based on this book, very pleased, called Fictional Academia. She's writing an encyclopedia, and she's got basically one more entry to research that she wants to include. And there's these hidden ones, these high fae that live on this island, and they have not been documented, and that's what she's there to do. She doesn't get in with the locals at first. She has a really hard time until Wendell shows up, her colleague, and he has ulterior motives, but he shows up and he worms his way into the good graces of everyone in town and helps her. And it was just so good. Like their back and forth was so great. And then the plot takes an unexpected turn about 60% of the way through. I cannot wait for book 2. I can't talk about this one. I can't. Just trust me, it's great. Top 3. Now these 3 have pretty much been the same since like September. They're locked in. This is another book that I originally gave 4 stars and rounded down. And then the longer it sat in my brain, the more I was like, oh dang, that book was good. I gotta give it 5 stars. It was one of my favorites of the year. Oh crap, this is number 3. And that's The Will of the Many by James Islington. So I love fantasy, and this book has everything that I love about fantasy. It's got great world building, it's got great characters, fabulous tension in the premise. The magic system is fascinating, but on top of that, it's also pretty metaphorical and hard-hitting in terms of what it's representing in the real world. So this is a book about a young man whose entire family was killed by this empire called the Hierarchy. Well, that's what people call them. They have a different name that they prefer, but basically his family was killed by colonizers, and he is actually the son of the ruling family of his former country, and he's in hiding, and he's going under a different name so that they don't find him and kill him, because they would do that if they knew who he was. He has vowed, because this country, this empire, it runs on something called will. So people in this country have the ability to cede their energy, their focus, their drive, their life force, essentially, a portion of it, to somebody above them. And then that person, the more people are under them, the stronger they are and more powerful. And it's literally a pyramid, and there's one person at the top that feeds on everyone. It's a great metaphor, I'm telling you. But he is adopted by a mid-range powerful person who's got a bunch of people under him. And he's set to infiltrate a school, a military school, because something funky is going on. And this person had a relative die at the school, and he wants to find out what's going on and what happened to his family. And I can't remember the details. This is why I need to reread it. But another conflict is that the main character, what is his name? He absolutely refuses now and in the future to cede his will to anyone. So all that is going on. And the magic school plot is sort of the center in him training to go into this school. But then there's other stuff going on under the surface. And at the end, it takes this hard turn that made me go, what? And I had to reread it 3 times. But what I love about this book is it's just so meaty. There's so much here for you to grab onto. It's one of those books, if I reread it, every time I reread it, I would notice something different. And I do not foresee this getting old. It is built for rereading. It is built for thinking on. And I'm so excited to see what he's going to do with the next two books in this series. Top 2. So this book, it was published, actually, when was it published? It was published in 2022, I think over the summer. And for whatever reason, it just didn't catch on. I don't know, people were sleeping on it. And then this year, people have been reading it and realizing it's basically one of the best books ever written, and everyone should read it. And that is The Spear Cuts Through Water by Simon Jimenez. This book was so good. What are you doing? So another one that's fantastically hard to talk about. So this is a book that it centers two boys, essentially, two young men who are escorting a dead god, who isn't really dead, but is dead, from their escape from the palace, because they were being held prisoner by the ruling family across the countryside. And this ruler is a tyrant and his sons are tyrants, and they have created a world that is full of violence and inequity and terror. And so in large part, it's about these boys taking this journey and dreaming of a better world. But what's great about this is that's the story inside of the story inside of the story. This is like, it's really hard to talk about, but there's a frame story with the main character, and I don't remember his name, but he's basically hearing stories from his grandmother, and the grandmother is telling him stories about a theater in a dream world that you can go and hear a story, and you can only go once. And the main character, so we're hearing those stories, and then tucked into the narrative, like a little Matryoshka doll, is the story of when he gets to go to that dream theater, and he's witnessing the story on a stage with other spiritual presences in this audience in this dream theater. And he's witnessing the story of the two boys. And then we also get into the story of the two boys, in addition to this description of him hearing about that. Oh my God, you guys, it's so hard to talk about it, and it sounds really complicated, and I've talked about it better in the past, and of course I'm failing right now when I need to succeed, but it was absolutely beautiful, and I could not put it down, and it was so good, and I need to read it again. It's like one of those rare books for me where the format and the writing is as important as the story, and in fact enhances the story. Like, this is a dude who knows his craft. He knows how to write, and he knows how to use the tools of writing to convey emotions and story and meaning. And it's so great, and I need everyone to read it. I've said that about a bunch of books, but I really mean it for that one. If you read one book out of this video, make it one of my top two. Or whatever. Read whatever you want. I don't care. Now my number one. Now, this is a book I read in January of 2023. And I said at the time, I was like, oh, did I just read my favorite book of the year? How weird, haha. I did. Nothing topped this. I've never read a book like this before. I love it so much. It's a book of my heart. That was cheesy, but I don't care. F you. The ghost says F you too. It's Flyer Dreamer thing. So this is a book I have pushed on so many people this year, and I'm sure everyone is tired of hearing me talk about it, but I love it so much, and I'll never stop loving it, and I need more people to read it because nobody is reading it. And it's a crime. It is a crime. Okay. This book is, I love it. So this is a book about, the blurb doesn't really do it justice. And I don't know what it is exactly that made me pick it up. I just picked it up on a whim from the library, the audiobook, which, by the way, the audiobook is amazing. I love the audiobook narrator for that. She really embodies the main character, Katrina Kim, for me. So this is about Katrina Kim, and she's in a really bad place. Her mental health is not great. She's neurodivergent to begin with, but her support systems have crumbled underneath her. She's working a deadbeat job. She's living in a one-bedroom apartment with a roommate, and she's not doing great. She's just not doing great. And also, she has let her mental health slide to the point where she's doing things like stalking her coworkers, one in particular, and his name is Kurt, and he becomes important later. But she also copes with her various mental challenges in very unhealthy ways. So there's an element of the speculative about this, because she imagines the world there's a literal imaginary place that she imagines. I'm not describing this well, where she places people in categories in this imaginary world, and she pictures them in this world, and that's her way of interpreting the world. But it's not actually happening. It's all inside of her head. And so that's where she is at the beginning. And then this coworker, who she's been obsessed with for several years now, one day she is driving across a bridge, which is one of her safe places that she goes to sort of recenter herself, another coping mechanism, and finds Kurt there and watches him jump off the bridge and kill himself. But before he does that, he basically tells her that it's her fault and he was stalking her too. So this sets her on this extremely chaotic investigation of finding who the hell Kurt was, what he was doing, why he was watching her, why he killed himself, and then there's other stuff going on where she seems to be pulled into the orbit of something else. It was just, I'm not describing it, okay? Just trust me. It was so great. The emotional through line of Katrina, of her like centering herself and finding herself again and reconciling with her family, like spoilers, like the way that it all comes together at the end, I cried. And so this book has so many things that I love. It's got the main character, it's never stated out loud, but she basically has OCD and she's neurodivergent in other ways. She's also a lesbian. I don't know, I forgot what I was saying. I'm thinking about the book again. So it's this most chaotic murder investigation slash conspiracy slash finding yourself narrative, like mental health book that I've ever read. And I don't know how else to sell it to you. It's not a creepy, everything is terrible book like the premise makes it sound. It's a joyful, celebrating humanity, celebrating the healing of and reconciliation between family members. And I don't just trust me, okay? This is my #1 book. And I loved it so much. And I can't wait to reread it. So those are my best books of 2023. I'm officially losing my voice. I can feel it. I hope that I have talked enough or well enough about some of these books that you're willing to give them a shot, because I love all of them. And I had a really great reading year in 2023. So here's to a really great reading year in 2024. And thank you all for being here. And please, if you've made it this far, leave me a heart emoji down below. Like, comment, and subscribe if you haven't, or if you wanna. And that's it. Hope you have a lovely rest of your New Year's. Okay, love you, bye.